guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Thursday, October 14th, 2021, and I'd like to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright guys, well, I am going to cover a very interesting article that comes to us from Ireland about a unusual cluster of gigantism occurring there, and the research that was done to sort of identify the origination of where this defect, quote unquote, occurred. And if you've been following me along on my channel, you know what I feel about gigantism and acromegaly, and that these particular types of irregularities occur because of the interbreeding between the giant humanoid species and regular Homo sapiens, and that not only was the basically the propaganda against the giants about them being cannibalism served at any number of purposes in those societies back then. And one of the things that they did was provide a taboo for their children, because they were quite aware of what would occur, that the results of interbreeding these hybrids that occur from interbreeding with the giant humanoids were, going to be problematic. So, in any number of ways. So, they knew about that. So that's part of the propaganda against the Giants. There's many things to be against the Giants about, and this was one of those things, okay? They knew what the results would be of crossbreeding between two different species of humanoid, and they provided the necessary, fictional taboos to go along with it. And, hence this is where we get the whole cannibalistic giant story from in the past. We're very creative with our propaganda against our enemies, and we've been doing it for time immemorial, so this should be no surprise to anybody or anything. Just typical behavior for us. So it's a very interesting article, but before we even get into that, I wanted to cover some of the legends of giants in Ireland. It won't take too long. And because we can often find some of the truths of the past hidden within these legends and myths about the giants, and, some of the current researchers in anthropology and archaeology are taking some of these myths quite seriously for the truths that they might reveal. So we're going to do that here in context of everything we've learned already on this channel. If you've been following me along in my Giants series, or large hominids, as I like to call them, you know a lot about them. You have a certain expertise in what these odd skeletal remains from the past are all about, and perhaps some of the cultural aspects that were related to them. So let's talk about some of the legends first before we get to the article about this unusual cluster of gigantism. And again, what I feel about it is depending upon, how well the integration occurs, because we still have vestiges of this left over, this gigantism and this acromegaly that occurs are just simply remnants from the crossing of the DNA and incompatibility, whatever incompatibilities there are. What research has been done is nothing. So we can't cite anything to support any of this, but through some of this research, we can get our own picture of it. We don't need any outside sources to tell us, about the reality or unreality of whatever it is that we're learning about. So We know about the hybrids. Many other researchers have talked about. And Andrew Collins wrote a book not all that long ago, a couple of years ago, about these hybrids, and so it's we know about it, but where can we see some of the evidence of this in myths and legends? Well, if you look closely enough, it's there. And, then we get a better picture of the past and what it was really all about. And maybe some of these myths and legends have, some truths to them to be had. So let me just go through some of it. It's just a couple of things here. The Giants Causeway, of course, which we know about this basalt, column place. It's in Ireland there. We'll read about it a little bit and the legend from it and talk about it a little bit. The Giants Causeway is an area of about 40,000 interlocking basalt columns, the result of ancient volcanic fissure eruption, if that's really what it is. I don't want to get into any other explanations, but let's just leave it at that. It is located in County Antrim on the north coast of Northern Ireland, about 3 miles, 5 kilometers northeast of the town of Bushmills. It was declared a World Heritage Site by UNESCO in 1986 and a National Nature Reserve in 1987 by the Department of the Environment for Northern Ireland. In a 2005 poll of Radio Times readers, the Giants Causeway was named the fourth greatest natural wonder in the United Kingdom. The tops of the columns form stepping stones that lead from the cliff foot and disappear under the sea. Most of the columns are hexagonal, although there are also some with 4, 5, 7, or 8 sides. The tallest are about 12 meters, 39 feet high, and the solidified lava in the cliffs is 28 meters, 92 feet thick in places. Much of the Giants Causeway and Causeway Coast World Heritage Site is owned and managed by the National Trust. It is one of the most popular tourist attractions in Northern Ireland, receiving over 998,000 visitors in 2019. Access to the Giants Causeway is free of charge. It is not necessary to go via the visitor center, which charges a fee. The remainder of the site is owned by the Crown Estate and several private landowners. Ooh, okay. Crown Estate and public landholders. Just sorry for about this, folks, in UK, but that's anti-American. All that stuff is. We're not about that kind of crown holding the lands. Well, you got sort of the same thing here. Geology. So I'm not going to go into the geology. Let's go into the legend of it because we don't need to talk about any of this stuff. According to the legend, the columns are the remains of a causeway built by a giant. The story goes that the Irish giant Fionn McCool, from the Fenian cycle of Gaelic mythology, was challenged to a fight by the Scottish giant Benan Donner. Fionn accepted the challenge and built the causeway across the North Channel so that the two giants could meet. In one version of the story, Fionn defeats Benan Donner. In another, Fionn hides from Benan Donner when he realizes that his foe is much bigger than he is. Fionn's wife, Sadfa, disguises Fionn as a baby and tucks him in a cradle. When Benan Donner sees the size of the quote-unquote baby, he reckons that his father, Fionn, must be a giant among giants. He flees back to Scotland in fright, destroying the causeway behind him so that Fionn would be unable to chase him down. Across the sea, there are identical basalt columns and part of the same ancient lava flow at Fingal's Cave on the Scottish island of Staffa, and it is possible that the story was influenced by this. In overall Irish mythology, Fionn McCumhale is not a giant but a hero with supernatural abilities, contrary to what this particular legend may suggest. In the fairy and folk tales of the Irish peasantry, it is noted that over time the pagan gods of Ireland grew smaller and smaller in the popular imagination until they turned into fairies. The pagan heroes grew bigger and bigger until they turned into the giants. There are no surviving pre-Christian stories about the Giants Causeway, but it may have originally been associated with the Fomorians. The Irish name Clocan na Beformhorag or Clocan na Beforhorag means stepping stones of the Fomhorai. The Fomhorai are a race of supernatural beings in Irish mythology who were sometimes described as giants and who may have originally been part of a pre-Christian pantheon. Okay, so I'm sorry for butchering all those Gaelic words, but who are these Fomorian folks? And I'm sure you've heard about the Fomorian folks before, but apparently the Fomorians were people who were living in Ireland there before it was settled by the Irish as we know them. In other words, they were displaced by, what we consider the current Irish peoples. So these Fomorians, supposedly these giants that lived at a time before the Irish peoples as we know them settled these places, but who was it that was there before in, I guess, the British Isles before it was settled by people that we know? Well, we know in Britain was, the Albion Giants were over there. So apparently these Fomorians were over here in Ireland and they were giant type peoples or whatever. So who was here before all of these people that we know about from, basic, academic scholarship in archaeology and anthropology? Well, who are those people? Well, it's the Bell Beaker culture. And even more supporting of that is what they say here at the beginning of this article in Wikipedia here. The bell beaker culture is an archaeological culture named after the inverted bell beaker drinking vessel used at the very beginning of the European Bronze Age, rising from around 2800 BC. It lasted in Britain until as late as 1800 BC. Unlike all these other areas in Europe here, they're saying, based on their research, that it was there until late 1800 BC. I'm not going to go down further in this page, but we read, and I've done and covered this on this channel, that these people were of a different phenotype with vaulted craniums, brachycephalic, brachycephalic craniums, which are these vaulted craniums, okay? Just completely odd looking with prominent jaws and everything else. Okay, that's who was there beforehand. I mean, it's like so stark the disconnect in the historians. It's like, it's like not even going to cross-reference this at all. Why? What are they trying to avoid? It's pathetic at this point. It's like they're trying to hide it from us or something because they don't want to get into the whole biblical argument with the people who support the Bible and the giants in the Bible and else. Meanwhile, none of us are learning the truth about the past, while these idiots are duking it out with their bullshit stories. Okay, and their omissions and everything else, and misinformation and blah blah blah. Okay, so let's read about the Fomorians, these people who were there before the people who settled Ireland got there, they had to displace. Okay, Bell Beaker people. So that's probably who these Fomorians were. The Fomorians are a supernatural race in Irish mythology. They are often portrayed as hostile and monstrous beings who come from under the sea or the earth. Later, they were portrayed as giants and sea raiders. They are enemies of Ireland's first settlers and opponents to the Tuatha De Danann. The other supernatural race in Irish mythology. However, their relationship to the Tuatha is complex. Some of their members intermarry and have children. The Fomorians have thus been likened to the Jotnar of Norse mythology and the Titans of Greco-Roman mythology, which are probably all references to real humanoids of the past that were there right before all these civilizations appeared. The Fomorians seem to have been gods who represent the harmful or destructive powers of nature, personifications of chaos, darkness, death, blight, and drought. The Twati, in contrast, seem to represent the gods of growth and civilization. So here, okay, so let's relate it about stuff we know about there being about these bad giants in the Americas and the good giants in the Americas and I guess the average giants in the Americas and the hybrid giants in the Americas. All these stories of the native peoples and what we can gather from the past in the Americas. Okay, similar to that. All right. There's many similarities, and a lot of people draw similarities in other ways. But in this, we're doing it right now for the first time. So, and I think also what was not said in the article about the Giants Causeway, that some of this legend where they tossed, and some of the causeway was torn down and what was created there. And there could be stories like this. I mean, I read it in other accounts of this legend here where they're like creating islands. Well, there's all these artificial islands, and some researchers have gone on about. Robert Sepher has gone over it on his channel about these artificial islands being created by people and how it was done by these giant folks, either creating artificial islands. Okay, so you got the giants of the past creating artificial islands, and you got the giants of the past creating artificial harbors and canal systems, some 7,000, 8,000 years ago. So, and, probably, cataclysms occurred in between all these things, as we know about. There were, just prior to our current age, all sorts of things were going on, folks. We're living in like the calm times, the calm period, and then things going to go haywire again, just like it's always been. It's cyclical. So, okay, so some of these giants were good. Some of these Fomorians were good, and some of them were bad. Okay, same old story about the giants and what we can gather from what legends passed on to our race. So I'm not going to get into it about the name here, but it says the Underworld Giants here. Okay, another suggestion that comes from more means something like the Great Underworld ones, the Underworld Giants. Okay, these people living underground in the past with all these underground cities and all these, hundreds and thousands of miles of tunnels underground everywhere. The whole earth is catacomb with all sorts of tunnels and underground cities and all. When people were living underground in the past, for some reason, okay, including these giant peoples, apparently, okay, the Nether Giants, okay. So listen to what's being said here, part of the etymology about the giants. Even they say the undersea ones. Okay. Think about these things that are being suggested and what it could mean in reality. Okay. The underground giants, the underworld giants, the great underworld one, the great underworld. Is this inner earth that we're talking about here? Not like it's been described from people doing research on these things with all these old things, but the whole earth is catacombs. Maybe that's the underworld that we're talking about. That's not a whole like internal sun and all this kind of other stuff. That's just fantasy, fantasy added to some truthful story about people living underground in the past, which they most certainly did. We have evidence of it with all these underground cities everywhere and all sorts of underground stuff. All right, so let's read about where it says here what we could possibly gain from. I'm not going to read the whole thing here because it's very lengthy about the whole soap opera going on with all of these particular Fomorians of the past. But you can read right here where it's telling us about a hybrid occurring in just right here for you folks. It's telling you about a hybridization occurring in the past in the legends of these Florians. Okay, so these are the good ones, right? The Tuatha De Danann, who are usually supposed to have been the gods of the Goidelic Irish, defeated the Fir Bolg in the first battle of Mag Tuired and took possession of Ireland. Because their king, Nuada Ar Getlam, had lost an arm in the battle and was no longer physically whole, their first king in Ireland was the half Fomorian. The first king in Ireland was the half Fomorian Brez. Okay, in Irish mythology, Brez was a king of the Tuatha De Danann. He's often referred to by the name of Eucad Ecobres. He was an unpopular king and favored his Fomorian kin. So, you know, are we talking about a time where these people ruled over regular people like was going on all over the planet as we know it from research done right here on this channel? Okay. That's what it seems to be suggesting. And it seems to be suggesting some hybridization between the giant humanoids and regular people happening right here. It's being told to you right here. Okay. It's not a legend. That's what actually occurred. Maybe all the rest of this stuff was, added stuff in there for entertainment value. I'm sure there plenty of stuff in there is, but what about some of the truths that we gain from it? Well, here's one of them. Okay, so they're creating these hybrids in the past. We know about it. Okay, we hear stories about them or whatever. So there must be like anything. Okay, when you have a certain level of compatibility among species, okay, there's probably going to be a range of effects when these two DNAs are combined. There's going to be incompatible aspects of the DNA too, obviously, because the sheer proportion and size, its relative properties towards the environment, all this stuff. Okay, so there's going to be a range of things. There's going to be a range of expressions of the DNA of one or the other occurring, sort of fighting a battle to take dominance over what expresses itself, dominant alleles or recessive genes, whatever they may be. Okay, we know of tails in human beings that supposedly might come from the Denisovans. All right, well, lots of other things could have been heard, but they don't acknowledge the existence of the giant humanoids of the past, even though you have people like the Frisians living around. And what's going on with this, and why would there be an unusual concentration of people suffering from gigantism in a place like Ireland where all these giant legends come from? Okay, and again, for I believe acromegaly and gigantism is that it's the incompatibility of whatever DNA doesn't match create these stages of it prevents the people from fully manifesting in one DNA or the other, somewhere in between, which leaves them with all these issues, these physical issues. But if it fully expresses itself, you have people of unusual size that don't seem to have any problems at all. Okay, but people who are suffering from gigantism and acromegaly, according to them, have all these problems, all these sort of medical problems. Okay, and I've gone over this on this channel. So, but what they're not getting, what the researchers are not getting, because nobody admits these giant humanoids existed in the past, is that whatever this tumor is that's going on with the pituitary gland, okay, In my mind, it seems to be vestigial. It's probably that the pituitary. Do we know what the pituitary glands were? What they look like? What they were shaped like? What their attributes were? Do we know that? We don't know that. So maybe this thing is not a tumor per se, but a vestigial part of pituitary gland left over from the giant humanoid species, and that particular thing, when fully manifested properly in the giants, was normal for them. Okay. Whereas it triggers growth in average human beings or whatever that we know about with mostly DNA that we can understand. If anybody's DNA can be understood, it's so messed up and botched up with people are crossbred with everything on the planet. It's just they cannot find any pure DNA anywhere for human beings. It's just some peoples have so many different DNAs in them, they just don't know where to begin. Okay, so maybe these things, what they're calling tumors, are not really tumors, but vestigial parts of the pituitary glands of the giant humanoid species. Okay. And when they don't fully manifest, the people are stuck in some stage of in between. Okay. And this is where they have all these problems. But apparently, in some people, like the Frisians, like the Watusi people, like the chiefs of the Fiji Islands, doesn't seem to be an issue. You can look at them and say they have acromegaly, but meanwhile, they look like they could bend steel girders and stuff. At least the acromegaly ones do. And the gigantism people just are frail and big and really can't do anything and suffer from all these problems, okay? Because the incompatibility of it. Okay, there's only a certain amount of compatibility here, and these people in the ancient past knew it. They knew what was going to happen if people. This is hence all the stories about the giants to try to keep their children away from the giant children and them producing offspring that were inviable or have all sorts of physical problems and whatnot. Okay, it's great when it worked out and the manifestation of the genes were just perfectly balanced, where you just have these supersized human beings that don't seem to have any physical problems and sometimes look like the epitome of physical strength. So we'll talk about it a little bit here as we go through this article here, which I think you'll find interesting, from Live Science. Unusual cluster of gigantism in Ireland traced to ancient gene. Mid-Ulster in Northern Ireland is home to the highest proportion of people with gigantism than any other place on Earth, scientists say. The land of giants. It sounds like something from a fairy tale, but it arguably exists in a region of Northern Ireland where a cluster of people with a genetic predisposition grow abnormally tall. In mid-Ulster, about 1 in 150 people carry a genetic mutation in the AIP gene that leads to an overproduction of growth hormone, resulting in acromegaly, also known as gigantism. Okay, so I don't. The hormone disorder is spurred by a tumor on the pituitary gland, a pea-sized organ at the base of the brain. So let's say, for example, in the real giants of the ancient past, before they crossbred with any of us regular Homo sapiens, that was normal for them, okay, to have this part of the pituitary gland that spurs growth like that, okay. Let's say it was normal for them, okay, because some people who are particularly huge don't seem to have any problem being big and don't have any sort of physical problems or anything, but cannot be explained. Their height and their hugeness, and being that their giant size, cannot be explained. Here's one of those guys, Drew McIntyre. If you don't know about professional wrestling, This guy is a giant from Scotland, okay? Does he look like he's suffering from anything? Okay? He's not suffering, alright? Some of the genes of the giants can fully express in some individuals, okay? As you notice with Drew McIntyre here, he doesn't have like a little peewee head and a giant body like most bodybuilders will have, okay? His head is in proportion to his body, and it's a bit different than yours or mine, all right? It's not suffering, right? This is what happens when it's fully expressed or expressed enough to override all our general Homo sapien genes, right? When it's not, you got gigantism occurring where it's caught somewhere in between because we really weren't supposed to interbreed with the giant humanoids. And that's what the story from the Bible is all about. It's a cautionary tale. But as we know from the Bible too, that's when the whole giant genocide started occurring because they had to get rid of them. But judging by the Frisian giants and the tales of the good giants, the giants weren't as evil as they were depicted to be, you see. So, this is probably the highest proportion of giants in the whole world in that little part of Northern Ireland. Marta Carbonitz, professor of endocrinology at Barts and the London School of Medicine Queen Mary, tells Seeker. Carbonitz led the team that discovered the link between the AIP gene defect in Irish populations and gigantism in 2011. In their latest research, Carbonitz and her team calculated that the AIP gene defect traces back 2,500 years. The team found the variant in Charles Byrne, a man born in 1761 who grew to be 7 feet 6 inches tall and was known as the Irish Giant, as well as in 18 other Irish families. Okay, so here's where they can sort of skate over the whole thing without explaining everything fully. Now, did this guy over here, Charles Byrne, look like Robert Wadslow there or whatever? This gigantism guy looked all kind of frail and didn't looked all hunched over and had all kinds of problems and whatnot, or did he look like Drew McIntyre? Okay, well that would tell us a lot, wouldn't it? All right, do they know, or are they just talking out their ass as usual? Right? Anything to not support any evidence of the Bible being real or whatever it is. And as I say, it doesn't go that far, but it may express, the Bible may tell something of an actual past and the peoples that existed, okay, and telling about the giant genocide and the giants that survived the flood. Whatever the flood was, a giant catastrophe of the many of them in the past. In children, there's rapid growth, which can be accompanied by joint pain, disabling headaches, vision problems, type 2 diabetes, facial distortion, and enlarged hands and feet. In adults, if symptoms develop late, adults don't get taller because their bones are already fused and may in fact shrink due to developing a curvature in the spine. Other symptoms include muscle weakness, hypertension, and difficulty sleeping. While these people might look big and powerful and strong, the long-term effects of excess IGF-1 and growth hormone are very disabling for these patients, explains Anthony Heaney, endocrinologist and professor at the David Geffen School of Medicine at the University of California, Los Angeles. We have this fascination with these really large, powerful people, and yet they themselves have a lot of morbidity and potential mortality from this disorder, Heaney continues. Yeah, because they're hybrids, they're chief. Okay. Treatments are available and include surgery, medication, or radiation therapy, but how effective those options depends largely on the progression of disease. Usually, by the time the clinicians get involved, patients have already developed large tumors, and complete control of the tumor and hormone regulation is hard to achieve. Even the best surgical centers in the world are just 50% effective at achieving that control, Heaney notes. Monitoring the lineage of the gene variant lets researchers keep an eye out for the children who inherit the defect. Early clinical intervention can help prevent the worst of the symptoms. Researchers say it's unlikely there are other hotspots with the same gene defect causing acromegaly. Humans have about 30,000 genes, and if you imagine that each gene is a book within a library, we have a library with 30,000 books, Corbinitz explains. The one which we're talking about here is called AIP, and the Irish guys have one particular spelling mistake in this book. To Heaney, who hails from Northern Ireland, it makes a lot of sense that a cluster of individuals prone to gigantism have been found in mid-Ulster, not only because of the fame of the giants like Bryn, but also the folklore of the region, specifically the myth of the giant Fionn McCumhale. The legend goes that Mac Cumhale created the Isle of Man by hurtling a piece of land torn from a lake known today as Loch Ness, and created the Giants Causeway, an interlocking series of basalt rocks that lead out to the ocean to the Scottish giant Benan Donner. With researchers looking into the real genetic heritage that inspired mythological figures and clinicians treating acromegaly, perhaps one day gigantism will only be found in fiction. Well, I don't think so, because we interbreeded with the giants, and now this stuff is going to pop up now and then in places where it seems prevalent, like this place in Ireland, which hardly seems surprising. But it's interesting what they say about this guy, that he Cumhale created the Isle of Man by hurling a piece of land torn from a lake. Well, that's identical to the story in Algonquin legend of one of the good giants in their folklore hurling his moccasins into the Long Island Sound area to create these islands there. Okay, sound familiar? Okay, so again, these shared cultures of the ancient past, the Bell Beaker people, and probably the Adena, were people who are related of these cultures that were across the planet, and going back even further to, okay, where did they come from? Okay, and what's their history? We don't know anything about it. Okay, a history and a past, just like Tolkien described, all right, that we don't know anything about. Okay, but here it is being affirmed, right? All these stories and everything, what we can relate to, what we know about the giants already are being told to us right here. Okay, so the stories are almost identical with the one from the Algonquin and this one here in Ireland. Okay, and people have made a lot of connections there. Okay, other researchers have made connections there in the folklore of and legends and whatnot. Okay, so, but the thing is that it's not purely myth and folklore and legend. Okay, we're talking about the real peoples who are there that they seem to disconnect from here. The Bell Beaker culture, we know these people were huge people that lived in these places in the past before all these stories and these people we're talking about. All right. So what about it? How would they never talk about it? There's no relationship there that could be to these myths and legends and all. It's ridiculous. How could you not make the connection there? It's absurd. But why aren't they doing it? I mean, it's just, can't they add two and two? I mean, it's just real easy. It's, why not? I don't get it. How could you mention all this without mentioning all of this? All right? It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Okay, more stuff that doesn't make any sense. Okay? Just like these autopsy findings of the girl there, I just talked about in my last video. Well, I read the whole thing there. We still don't know anything, and it still doesn't make any sense. Okay? Maybe her body was completely decomposed or whatever, and they had to do all this science to try to figure out. But they're grasping at straws. Evidence of this sort of manual strangulation on a completely decomposed body is going to be difficult to prove. And despite the fact that, what are they going to say? They found his hair on her body? Of course they did. You know, it's nonsense. So, in any case, guys, look, that was the article there about this unusual cluster of gigantism in a place that we know giants existed in the past, these Bell Beaker people. Okay, we all know about the dynamics of what was going on in the past between the Adena and the Hopewell people, and most likely the same dynamics were going on with the Bell Beaker people. It's just not talked about at all. Well, here we have some evidence of it in the legends here, like in the hybrid there, the first king of Ireland there being a hybrid. It's telling you right here, the guy was. First king of Ireland, the half Fomorian. Half Fomorian, half giant. Okay? Well, some of these giants turn out with acromegaly and gigantism and had these problems and everything. It was just the giant genes in them trying to express themselves, but they can't for whatever reasons, the incompatibility. But sometimes they do successfully. See? Okay? There's no explanation for Drew McIntyre. He should be the same size as everybody else in this world. Okay? But he's not. And he doesn't appear to be suffering from much, does he? Okay? That guy's hand, he could just palm the top of your head. If you're like 6'5", he could just palm the top of your head like a basketball. Okay? With his big old hand. Right? A real giant. Drew McIntyre should be proud that he's got the genes of the Giants in him. He may not know it, but he's got the genes of the Giants in him. For real. Okay? Anyway, guys, I thought you might like to hear about that if you're interested in the whole Giant thread that I do on my channel here. This to me is just more supporting evidence of what I'm talking about. Okay? And I'm telling you all about it. Okay? You've learned on this channel all sorts of things. You should be experts at this, all right? Here's the story to tell you, and who was living there before they got there, and the Giants of Albion and the Fomorians. Well, guess who, folks? There's no legend about it or myth or anything. That's who was here before they got there. End of fucking story, all right? Why they don't put it together? Why don't you ask them, all right? All right, guys. Anyway, if you like the video, please do hit the like button and please do subscribe because we're telling it like it is on this channel, okay? We're not pulling any punches or anything like that, okay? You want to learn about history and what the real history of this planet is, well, you got to come to this channel here to get the straight stuff, okay? You're not going to get it anywhere else. All that gigantism stuff and whatnot that they talk about, they don't know anything about and what it could be from and all. We know what it is, okay? Everything they talk about, all the alternative, the cannibalistic, all baloney stories about these people, they're all like the Frisians, all the most peaceful people, the nicest people voted year after year after year, right? That's their demeanor, like Bigfoot, cryptids is just doing one about it, and, the Giants of Lovelock Cave, well, they probably had the same demeanor. They weren't violent and all this kind of stuff and didn't want to be, but hey, it doesn't matter because you got to get rid of them. There's going to be problems with them around, so we got rid of them as a species. We got rid of all the other species. We tried to get rid of all the pygmy people too. We didn't quite succeed at that, but we tried. Okay, we just don't like little people or big giant people. We like people like us, down to our size, and that's it. Because we're scared, right? But somewhere in the past, they all got along with each other and everybody respected each other. Okay, we can't do that now, so because we're all corrupted by our culture, which is junk. All right, guys. Anyway, please do hit the like and please do subscribe. All right, Bugcat7 signing out. Peace.